The qualities of conservatism and the qualities, I think, of a parliamentary democracy have been heavily tested in the last 6 years, partly by the referendum and partly by the Liz Truss ideology and the exposure of one of the prime ministers, Boris, as a lying, self-seeking opportunist. But many politicians have been opportunists. They just haven't been exposed as such. The Conservative Party has been in existence for 3.5 centuries, and it's been extraordinarily good at adapting to situations. And I think it's getting to the end of the line. It's been skeptical, it's been questioning, it's been able to embrace a wide church, and it's been able to carry a large number of the thinking public behind it. But a lot is a lot of my analysis comes out of Rishi Sunak's announcement of a general election and why he did it. And I think there's 4 competing reasons. First of all, his father-in-law may have got enough money from all the deals that were being done one way or another. I think we can dismiss that. I think that's conspiracy rubbish and a bit sort of ad hominem and an inappropriate Narayana Murthy. It's a bit of an inappropriate and nasty jibe. But hard on the heels of that is the idea that there were party political reasons that, frankly, as he was standing there in the rain and we were hearing Steve Bray trolling the 1997 campaign song of the Labour Party, "Things Can Only Get Better," we could see that things could only get wetter. And this was a manifestation of incompetence, of Rishi Sunak at his most despairing. We're told that he is depressed. He looked as if he was giving a resignation speech. He looked abject. He looked miserable. He looked wet. He looked soaked. And he knows what the forecasts are. The forecasts are saying, well, there's a small inflation drop. This is as good as it gets. And things can only get wetter. And maybe politically things were due to be exposed. The Reform UK was likely to become more powerful over the next few months. At least going to the polls immediately meant that Reform UK was not able to get enough candidates together, that it wasn't able to vet those that it got, even if it could find them. It's already had problems with many candidates being exposed as racist, Islamophobic, contemptuous of Catholics, of gay people, and so on. So if Reform UK dominates the media as its candidates are exposed as twits during the campaign, that helps Rishi Sunak to pull people who might have been voting Reform UK back to their conservative roots. Secondly, of course, the national debt is rising, and there's already been concerns that the IMF has been warning against tax cuts, so effectively emasculating Jeremy Hunt's proposals. We're told that there's anemic growth, and we can see the state collapsing in front of our eyes. The small boats. Rishi Sunak wants wants to play games with very specific timelines, but the small boats, there's never been so many small boats as there have been in the first half of this year. And that's only likely to get worse. And the Rwanda scheme is exactly that. It's a scheme. It's a crackpot idea. And it's not a deterrent, no matter how often the rhetoric is trotted out. It's not deterring people who are already risking their lives from getting in a small boat. And it's certainly not stopping the traffickers or the smugglers. It's not stopping that particular trade. So the small boats were likely to explode over the summer and give the lie to that rhetoric. As also, over the summer, people's fixed-rate mortgages would come to an end and they'd be renegotiating, and they find that they're going to have this mortgage shocker. And that, again, would drive many people into fury with the Conservative Party, which is supposed to be the party of financial probity. So all of that, party political reasons, economic reasons. The third idea touches on something I've already mentioned, which is that he's had enough. He's depressed. And I think he's just given up. Seeing the way he's bounced back in the first 2 days of the election campaign, why is it 6 weeks? Most of the time a general election is about 3 weeks. Why has this one got such a long run in, and it's so long? Why? Again, madness. Does he hope that something is going to turn up the longer it lasts? Again, we think maybe that's where Reform UK is going to implode because of the pressure of a campaign with a lot of untried candidates. So those are three of the reasons. The fourth reason is much more interesting. I put this up the other day that maybe he's going 6 months earlier than he has to because he's been told by Sir Graham Brady that the letters of no confidence are building up, and that he's sort of, 1 letter, 2 letters in danger of having a no confidence vote, and that won't look good in the run-up to an election, which must take place within 6 months. And so those are some of the reasons why I think he's gone to the people so soon and so suddenly. I think it's more likely to be that there's talk of letters of no confidence, or indeed that it's party political reasons. I certainly don't think that Andrew Bridgen's extraordinary idea, and there's a video about Andrew Bridgen's nonsense that I put up earlier. As for the Rwanda project, we know that Rishi Sunak wasn't behind it. We know. And yet he's been spouting these slogans, as has James Cleverly. James Cleverly is the person who called it batshit crazy. Sunak thought that it was too costly and its feasibility made it unworkable. And yet both of these people have been behind this nonsense. Now, holding the election before a plane takes off means that the Conservative Party, Rishi, can still promise that the Rwanda plan will work, can still promise that the planes will happen without actually having to deliver, without actually having to expose how useless the Rwanda project really is. And you'll find over the next 6 weeks there will be a blurring between the Rwanda plan and the plan that's being touted by 15 European states about the possibility of offshoring the process of looking after migrants before a decision is made. It's not quite the same thing that is being done in Rwanda. But you will hear the Conservatives saying, Europe is now coming round to our point of view. Not true. Not true. The idea being put forward between Italy and Albania is not that Albania is acting as a deterrent. In fact, Italy and Europe is only too keen to say that they must act within the confines of the law and within human rights, and certainly not to be punishing people for the method of transport that they are using. If somebody wishes to apply for asylum, then they will be processed in another country, like Albania, like maybe Turkey. Other countries have been positive. But of course, we could easily be sharing in that, just as there is talk that Europe could use the British Army if it went to war. We could easily be sharing in that. Except that Suella Braverman was the one screaming from the podium at the dispatch box that Albania was an invader. What I find so sad is that Lord Cameron was poised to sort out that problem in Albania and was called back for the general election. So again, Albania is left in the lurch. So it's all about promise. It's all about teasing, promising future tax cuts without having to show that by the time we get to November, the Conservative Party would have to fail to deliver those tax cuts. You notice Rishi's speech all about his brilliance during COVID, but no mention of Eat Out to Help Out. No mention of the COVID fraud or the PPE fakes, but instead an attempt to look back with nostalgia to the time when Rishi Sunak was popular. The Conservative Party has defined a lot of recent political history, because since Thatcher there hasn't been a party that has seriously changed the UK. The last change before Thatcher was Attlee. These two giants of political transformation, the Attlee government, very short, and the Thatcher government, very long. Whether you like them or whether you don't like them, these two changed society. Rishi Sunak was a footnote to Liz Truss. Now, that's not much to put on your history books, is it? It's not much to write home about. I was a footnote to Liz Truss. And Liz Truss, in turn, was a footnote to Boris Johnson, who was a footnote to Theresa May. Rishi Sunak comes a long way down the list. And there's very little policy to choose between Starmer and Rishi Sunak, to choose between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. In fact, the less policy that Sir Keir Starmer puts out, the more likely he is to win. The more he talks, the more he's likely to shoot himself in the foot. Because this is an election ripe for the taking, the less that's said. Because it's not about an election which is being won, it's about an election which is being lost, and that is already happening. And I think this election was inevitable in 2019. In 2019, although there was this huge increase, it was being presided over by a man who was demonstrably a cynical opportunist, who had openly touted for both sides, who was backing the Leave campaign without expecting to win, because he thought, as Dominic Lawson pointed out, that if he supported Brexit, that was the only way that he was actually going to get his hands on power. And it is ironic, isn't it, that it's the Conservative Party, this party that's been so adaptable. It's a Conservative Party that was so pro EU. Macmillan tried to take us into the EEC, the common market. Edward Heath actually did so. Harold Wilson was forced to hold a referendum. Referendums that Mrs. Thatcher said are the device of dictators and demagogues. They are opposed to real democracy. Real democracy is to be found in a parliamentary system. And so what we got in 2016 was the shock, not of Brexit, well, we had the shock of Brexit anyway, but also the shock of a direct opposition between these two systems, between the system of the referendum and the system of parliamentary democracy. It's hardly surprising that under a very weak Prime Minister like Theresa May, these two systems could not breathe. And both were exhausted, as was the electorate. And partly Boris Johnson's clarity, just one thing, get Brexit done. Just one idea. An exhausted electorate was quite happy to pick that up. And then you get Rishi Sunak, 5 pledges, you can't remember 2 of them. 6 pledges of Keir Starmer. This is madness. It's madness. I want to outdo the Conservatives by having an extra pledge. You know, what pillock came up with the idea that the more pledges we've got, the better we're going to be? Any day now, we're going to find is Reform UK going to try and ape God and say, "I got 10 pledges"? It is madness. And anyway, even with the 10 commandments, I defy anybody to be able to name them in order and correctly, and then to tell me which version of the 10 commandments they're following, because there are 2. So even in the Bible, they can't count up to 10 accurately. That is the problem. And then as for Liz Truss, the one slogan she had was so despising of the British people. The British people are the worst idlers on earth. That from Britannia Unchained. Whether she wrote it, or Kwasi Kwarteng wrote it, or Kemi Badenoch wrote it, it doesn't matter who wrote it. She took that book as her defining pamphlet. That was her Bible. She was contemptuous of us. And Rishi Sunak has spent 2 years trying to regain trust. But once trust is lost, you can't regain it on the political stage. You have to acquiesce, lie down, and take the punishment. This punishment which Rishi Sunak has brought in, has ushered in this week, has been overdue and should have come in 2 years ago. And then maybe the Conservative Party might have survived. Now, I think it is heading for annihilation after 3.5 centuries.